Hey guys, today will be a different type of episode. Mike will be answering some questions that you've asked from our Instagram. I'm looking forward to getting into this one.
I want more than just a piece. Wanna be heard from the west to the east. I worked in my craft and I prayed for my time on the scene. The man have never left my team. 19, learned the right creed. Nah, I'm not a right breed, but I might be. In my crease, Nikes, hit up my G. I'll still never sell out my theme. Well, you know about heritage, you go inherited. Don't chill with the snakes, but the flow's still venomous. Perspective is everything. So much lemonade, I don't know what a lemon is.
So we're joined by MT.
Hey.
How you doing?
I'm good, man. I like Q&A episodes. It feels, I don't know, man. It feels different. Like I'm not sat on the chair I'm normally sat on. Yeah, You're here. It's like, oh, this is new. This is different.
A different
feels like a Christmas episode.
Yeah. It's close to Christmas, isn't it?
It is close to Christmas. Obviously, I hope this goes out soon.
You
so
imagine?
you have to be careful what you say. But Christmas is soon. That's the best I can say.
Okay, we're going to start with some questions.
Okay, let's get
that you're going to answer.
Let's go.
Cool. First one. Do you think we're moving backwards or forwards in society?
Someone asked, do I think what?
Do you think we're moving backwards or forwards in society? I don't know why they worded it like that.
Yeah.
Because it'd be forwards or backwards, but yeah, that's the question.
I mean, it's a good question because I do sometimes wonder, like, you know, as we all do, like sometimes you sit down and you just kind of wonder, are things getting better or are things getting worse? Honestly, it depends what you're looking at, right? If we're being, quite frank in that, if you're looking at, how much money the average household income has, not in absolute terms, but in relative terms. So essentially, am I richer than my dad was when he was younger, or will I be richer than my dad is now in the future? Our generation reportedly is one of the first generations that might be poorer than their parents, because of how expensive it is to get on the property ladder, because of how difficult it is to own any asset really these days. So when you look at things from that perspective, society is clearly not getting better. But at the same time, we are, the first generation, if you like, that grew up with smartphones and have been marketed to our whole lives, and we've got access to digital in a way that other generations haven't. So when I think about it, honestly, I guess it depends if you're pessimistic or optimistic. I just look at the fact that wage inequality is higher than it's ever been. Wealth inequality is higher. It's actually worsened by COVID. I look at the fact that in London, particularly, the number of people who are in work but also poor and having to rely on food banks is also high. All of that stuff makes me feel like we could be doing a whole lot better as a country, especially a developed, one of the kind of, most forward-thinking countries in the world. I think we could be doing a whole lot better. So I would say, as a society, we are moving. I feel like we're moonwalking backwards, but I think things need to change soon.
I like that analogy.
Because you like Michael Jackson, right?
He's alright. He's controversial.
Whoa, is he? Is this a musician?
It could be, yeah. But to be fair, talking about cost of living crisis as we're leading onto it, talking about the issues that this country has faced in the last month or so, especially within the Conservative Party, like what's your opinions on the mini budget, that fiasco?
That's a good question. It's been difficult to talk about. I actually find it very stressful to talk about the budget or pretty much anything with the government as of late, because everything changes so quickly. I don't like change. I like when things stay the same. If you're going to be involved in political analysis, it's really helpful when things are somewhat stable. Politics is at the best of times tumultuous, messy, whatever. But it's nice when you can predict some things. And I think as of late, it's been very hard to predict anything. It's also hard because we're recording this podcast now because of how fast moving things are. We run the risk of literally in hours this podcast being like defunct and not useful anymore. But as it stands, just to give people a time check, we're recording this post Kwasi Kwarteng's resignation or firing, sacking, whatever you want to call it. Liz Truss has come back out to say, I'm still committed to the general plan, which is to grow the British economy. However, we were maybe too fast and the markets responded in kind, and the Bank of England as well. So with that to the side, I think the budget is reckless. That is the best way to put it. And it's reckless for a very simple reason, which I think a lot of people will understand, even if you're not interested in the economics. The economy growing at large, the way to think about it is that the economy is basically all the people who participate in making money and spending money. That's what the economy is in a very simple term. Gross domestic product is what you'd call a company's output. And that is, on the income side at least, that's, or on the kind of consumer side, that's at least measured by something we would call CGI plus X minus M. Any economic students will be like, oh, I remember that. Essentially, it's the addition of government spending, investments, and consumer spending, so CGI, and then that minus exports minus imports, right? So that's the equation. So essentially, when you're setting economic policy, whether it's supply side, whether it's fiscal, whether it's monetary, what you're trying to do is play a delicate balance game of all those different factors. So for instance, if you're going to cut government spending and take away money from the economy, then you might be expected to loosen tax so that people will spend more. So you're kind of balancing things. And what we had with Kwasi Kwarteng was him come along and essentially give us a budget that doesn't balance. He just says, we are cutting tax, so we're not going to be getting tax revenues, and like we're just going to keep on spending. So it's like, hold on, what money are you going to spend? If you don't have the tax revenues, what money are you going to spend? And he was just like, oh, we'll find out later on in November. And that's what the markets were responding to. They were saying this is reckless. This isn't good fiscal discipline, as it were. Fiscal policy means government spending and taxation. So essentially, you had an expansionary fiscal policy. Then the Bank of England came along with a contractionary monetary policy. So those two things together just didn't add up. So ultimately, in simple terms, the budget just didn't make sense. At some stage they had to cut government spending, right? Because you can't keep spending when you're taking your money in. And corporation tax, which they also cut, we've now learned they're going to reverse it. So we're going to actually pay more corporation tax. It's just interesting because it just shows that when you're hungry to be popular and to do things people like, you can sometimes just walk away, moonwalk away, if you like, from sensible, just economic policy. I mean, literally, an economic student from A level could look at that and be like, that doesn't balance.
That makes sense.
And that's what the issue is. So for me, that's what I think the problem is. Clearly, Liz Truss is backing away from everything she announced in her mini budget, which obviously wasn't so mini. It kind of makes you think, if everything you advocated for, you're now walking away from, how can you be the one to lead us in this change of direction? Surely Rishi Sunak is the leader the Conservative Party should have. I'm not a big supporter of Rishi.
Ready for Rishi is coming back. Remember, we're ready. Everyone's ready.
So I think everyone's ready at this stage after what we've seen.
Yeah.
Bear in mind, Kwasi Kwarteng was there for like 38 days, bro.
I know. Insane.
Things changing just like that. But hey, that's that.
And even regardless, I think balance is the best sort of example you could have given, because even this month has been crazy in terms of the pound crashing, which I know has slightly affected your potential travel plans.
Whoa, you're gonna put me on blast on the podcast?
Well, potential is potential.
Yeah, I mean, it's also important for people not to get too fixated on markets. I mean, it's interesting. Like all my friends who are bankers, whatever, and financiers will kind of obviously obsess over it.
Yeah, of course.
But the truth of the matter is, if you're playing the long term the long-term game, yes, shocks are important to pay attention to, but at the same time, we're thinking that we're looking at a 10-year timeline and going, how does the UK economy become a high-growth economy again? How does it start producing things again? For such a long time, financial services has been our chief export, but the issue is, like, lots of countries are catching up, and this country really isn't seen as the access into Europe as because of Brexit. So quite a lot's changed in the country's kind of offering, and I think the UK does have this kind of deep question to ask of, what does it offer the global world now, right? Before it was, we could get people into Europe, if we're being quite frank and honest. Now we can't do that. Other countries are catching up. We can't rely on Russia and Russian oil like we used to. So a lot is changing in this country's makeup, and there's lots of unanswered questions that whoever's in charge has to answer.
And the thing is, with 38 days being sort of a pivotal number, and actually quite a scary number, in fact. So overall, do you think Mr. Kwarteng should have resigned?
I mean, it's odd because these questions came up, you never should have taken the role. The funny thing about politics is, not funny, but a lot of these politicians start off as friends in school, in uni, and like they have all these plans about the future. And I guess sometimes they always say they're putting the country's interest, first, but you have to realize, like, Liz and Kwasi are friends. I mean, they've always been friends and long-term friends. And for them, this feels like their moment of emancipation. They're kind of arriving, they're reaching political maturity, all these kind of things. So, he probably wasn't the right person to take the role, because it seems as though that, Liz Truss was always adamant that this was the agenda she wanted to pursue. And so she just needed someone to fall in line and to kind of follow that. And then obviously if it didn't work, which it hasn't, that person will take the fall. So he should never have taken the role. It's a shame that he's also black, because, of course, not to make this a race thing, but it does affect how people now think, a black man holds the record for the shortest tenure in number 11. And so people say, when's the next black president going to get in, now that everyone associates what's happened with... I don't know about that, but it is a shame that it's in Black History Month as well. Happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History Month. So... although, as we've mentioned, it's quite... You could say the questions that were asked, you could say almost like a premonition, because like one of the questions that was asked was, how many strikes should we have given Mr. Kwasi Kwarteng? And what is your answer to that?
How many strikes should we have given him?
Yeah, like
it's weird. We're in an odd period in British politics where things are so topsy-turvy.
Yeah.
Is that the thing?
Yeah.
The term. So it's hard to know anything, if I'm honest with you, mate, because I would have thought, we would have liked to see him at least release that budget, that kind of the second stage or the second half of the budget he released like later on in November, but it wasn't to be, man. I would like to see Jeremy Hunt as the new Chancellor, someone we've worked with before at Common Sense. He's actually a really nice guy. I tweeted about it. Not that matters. Because if he's nice.
Free clout.
But he's sensible, he's stable, he's been like a front bencher, and he's been part of, he used to manage health secretary, of course, and then he was foreign affairs in the FCO. So he's like a kind of stable hand. So you'd hope that would calm the markets, that an adult is in the room, so to speak. But I would like to see him stay, because we've had 4 different chancellors in the past 4 months. So it would be nice if we could just have one person at least till Christmas or after Christmas. My question is whether Liz Truss can actually stay as Prime Minister. That for me is a real. I'm not sure if that can happen, but hey.
So digressing away from sort of British politics and more leaning towards a geopolitical issue, one of the questions I was asked that was of the lines of, what do you think the effects of the Ukraine war will be post-2023?
Good question. What will happen in Ukraine? I wish I knew what and I could say what would happen. I think there's a couple of things that it's already happening, and so it would be interesting to see how they mature, especially 2023 to 2020 kind of 5, 6, so to speak. One is obviously Ukraine joining, and again, this is assuming that Ukraine maintains its kind of territorial integrity, is able to force, kind of Russia out, and is a country in the way it was before, barring all the random parts that Russia claims they've liberated through some referendum, and even Crimea. I mean, this is probably the best time for Ukraine to take back Crimea. So, assuming we're back in business, so to speak, it's a country again, and it hasn't got this kind of foreign threat that's always looking to attack. It will be interesting to see what happens when Ukraine joins the European Union, right? So they're currently fast tracking the membership. Once it joins the EU, it's now part of a bigger bloc, which means Russia can't do what it used to do. It will be interesting to see what happens there. It will be interesting to see what happens with China. I think China's been forced now to kind of show itself. Of course, we all know already kind of China's involvement with Russia and China's ambition with Taiwan. I think we'll see that probably reaches maturity in the next 5 years as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I think Belarus has always been this kind of, if you think about the actual neighboring countries, Belarus has always been obviously a quiet but has always allowed Russia to do whatever it wants to do historically. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Belarus in the future. Like, does Belarus continue being this kind of Russian, I don't know the term, but just a country that allows Russia to kind of use, their country for Russia. Russia does training there. Allegedly, Russia even mounted some attacks from that region as well. That's neither here nor there. But essentially, it will be interesting to see what happens there as well. I think clearly stability in Europe, in that region, is forever changed. I mean, just rebuilding back Ukraine, it's going to be, it's just a few weeks ago, we saw Russia attacking critical or crucial infrastructure in Ukraine, knocking out something like 20% of the country's capabilities. Like, rebuilding will be a mammoth task. And so all those different things, I think, are things that are playing out. That will play out, and obviously we'll be watching it closely, and it will be very fascinating to see what happens.
Yeah, so I'd say leading away from sort of very complex and intricate issues, global issues, what I would say is completely unrelated now. My perception of you is an individual who solves complex problems at a rapid rate. And I feel like you can resonate and relate to the term being a polymath.
Yeah. It's on my bio.
Yeah.
Did someone ask about being a polymath?
Yeah. It was like, what are some tips for being a polymath? What does that world look like?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. For the folks who are listening or watching who maybe don't know what that term is, probably helpful that we just kind of talk about it really quickly. So a polymath or polymathy is basically a term that, etymology is always complicated because, there's lots of different places where words come from. But, the idea is that Batista in 1404, he lived, I think, from 1404 to 1472 thereof. He coined the term, apparently, because he spoke about, he had this maxim, this phrase that a man can do everything he wills to do. So his belief was like, if you've seen that film, Limitless, that our brains are actually limitless, right? And we only use a tiny % of our brains. So his belief was that man could be anything man wills to be. And so a polymath is someone whose knowledge or interests span a wide range. And they're not just like, master jack of all trades, but they are good at a number of different vastly varying trades, as it was. That's what a polymath is. I do think polymathy is kind of available to everybody if we should tap into all the part of our brain we don't use. And so, that's what the term is. And another way people used to describe it is a Renaissance man or, a Renaissance woman, someone who, because in the Renaissance, you remember, like, a lot of folks who were part of that movement and a lot of the philosophers we know, they were like musicians, artists, architects, mathematicians, and like authors. And you're like, wow, like they excelled in a range of industries and, had to put themselves out there. The difficulty is we live in a market economy, and in the market economy, you have to also think about commodification, namely whatever skill you have, to what degree can people pay you for doing X, Y, and Z. And so when you factor that in, I think it becomes interesting because it really pays to be a polymath at the top end, where you've got, you're solving really difficult problems, you're being highly paid. When you're at the kind of start of the career, of your career, and you have a bunch of different things you're good at, it can actually be confusing for people because they're like, yeah, but what do you do? Like, what can I pay you for? Like, what job will you do? So I think anyone who's like predisposed to polymathy, they have to take on the reality of we live in a market economy, which means what's the one thing or two things, essentially a few things that you can do and be paid for, because you need money, unfortunately. In the way the world works, you can't just walk around asking for food and drink and a house. You have to make money, save money, so on and so forth. So that's the first thing. But then in a kind of ironic way, don't be too focused on money, because just because you're not doing something and being paid for it doesn't mean that thing is useless. So in my head, I'm paid for, maybe speaking or like, running a company, whatever it is, that's what I'm paid for. But I might, play sports or make music and do that equally at a very, very high level, make some great, massive impact, but it's not my full-time job. I'm not paid for that as well. So I would say explore the full breadth of your creativity, explore the full breadth of your interests, And don't place an economic value on everything, but do realize that in order to function, you do need to have at least one thing that has economic value that you can be paid for. That's what I would say to anyone who's kind of that way predisposed.
So we're sort of refining quality and sort of, I guess, being exposed to your own breadth of creativity. What I would say is, for someone who might have their hand in different hats and in different pots, often there's a case of you're involved in so many sort of situations or organizations, you do a multitude of things, that sometimes you're often burnt out and maybe unsatisfied from what you're doing, because maybe it's not your passion, because you have 12 different passions. So do you have any advice for someone who is going through a burnout of a job, or is maybe unsatisfied with their situation because of sort of polymathy and those concepts?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not some kind of wise sage, right? So I've got no kind of like wisdom to offer in that way. But speaking from experience, I think when I'm unsatisfied, personally, it's often tied to some sort of problem that I'm not solving. But I do think one thing that I've learned, especially like in doing business, as it were, like, full disclosure, I never went to do business. Like, I'm really not a business person. And I mean that in that, I'm more fascinated by problems and solving problems than I am like building businesses. I think business is a very particular thing. Also, in school, I never sold anything, right? You see, they're always like, oh, you sold chips and not chips, what the heck?
Sweets.
You sold sweets or
stuff,
cookies. Never did that. So I was talking to my housemate about this not so long ago, and I said, one of the bad things I've developed over the past few years is connecting my emotional well-being, sometimes even spiritual well-being, to the work I'm doing, because growing up, I was very kind of out there. I was doing the most, right? And over the last few years, I think I've dialed down quite a bit, especially compared to my younger self. And it's because when you attach your emotions to a business, when the business is doing well, you're up, right? When the business is doing bad, you're down. If a client cancels a project, you're down. If you get 2 new clients, you're up. And so one of the things I can offer them is to separate themselves from what they're building or what they're doing, because we're human beings, not doings, right? So we shouldn't obsess over what we're doing. We should really think about how we can be. And I've learned that, and I'm learning that right now. Literally a few days ago, I was talking about this. How do I separate myself, fall in love with simple joys, simple thrills, not be so obsessed with like how I'm doing, and not allow how I'm doing to color how I am, like how I actually am. That's been very liberating, because I'm involved in so many different things. Like, I can look at what, I'm in Manchester soon for a board meeting with Salford University. I could sit in that meeting and be like, yeah, okay, we're doing really well. And then my mood changes. Then I'm about to join a new board, right? Which I might join, and they send me like a letter of like, oh, we're going through a lot right now. And then my mood goes down again. Then I come to common sense, and, turns out we've got 4 new clients and 3 new projects that are doing really, really well. And I'm like, oh, I'm good again. And then I look at another organizer. And if you do that, your emotions just fluctuate way more than anyone's emotions should fluctuate. So, rescuing myself from myself by detaching myself emotionally from what I'm doing has really freed me to kind of, to answer questions because people sometimes ask you, how are you doing? And I'll be like, oh yeah, well, the business is, and it's like, that's the business. Separating both those 2 things has been quite liberating for me.
Cool. In relation to what you just said about sort of separating emotion to identity with different businesses and different organizations, what is a common sense ethos and mindset, and how do you apply that to your day-to-day?
That is really good. Yeah, man. What is a common sense ethos? That's really good. When we started all of this, it actually started with me having, or at least the initial impetus was me having dinner with a friend of mine, a female friend of mine. And she was just talking, and we were talking about how like the news is so polarized. And like, you go to one corner, you believe one thing, you go to another corner, you believe another thing. And we were like we know ourselves. We're not tribal. Like, I'm not naturally tribal. I like exploring. Like, I'm the kid that would pick up stones and unturn them. That's my nature. And when we were at that age, finishing our masters, it just felt as though the world like was cajoling us into a certain group. And I just didn't feel comfortable. So I think the common sense ethos, if I had to boil it down, I think it's about being an explorer, being somebody who is always searching for truth, but never quite finding it. In fact, Immanuel Kant had a famous phrase when my first blog was a philosophy blog. Such a sad guy.
It's not sad.
Where I used to write about philosophers, and I remember it was called. The tagline was believe the truth seekers and doubt the truth finders. So believe those who are looking for the truth, searching for the truth, but doubt those who think they found it. And it's funny, like this is my first time even reasoning this out loud, but that was a random blog I started when I was like, I don't know, maybe like I would have been maybe 18 or something, right? Actually 10 years ago. And that was like so important to me, the idea that people who are seeking the truth, you can trust them because they are honest, they're out there, they're exploring. People who say they found it often are just people who are projecting strength. You know, so for instance, the idea that all the solutions to the world lies in the Conservative Party is like, really? I mean, look at what we've seen over the past few days. But how foolish would you be if you thought, the solution is the Labour Party? Really? That's the solution? Of course it's not. No one has a monopoly on good ideas. No one has a monopoly on all. Listen, the NHS is a Labour invention. We love it, right? Now, is the NHS perfect? No. In fact, years ago, the NHS would have totally capsized if it wasn't for restructuring primarily by the Conservative Party. There's lots of things. The minimum wage, the 5-day week. There's all these things that come from the left, and there's lots of good things that come from the right. I can't remember any right now. I'm joking. I'm playing. But I actually can't remember many right now. But you know, no one has all a monopoly on good ideas. So the common sense ethos is about being a good, an honest seeker of the truth. Never pretending you found the truth. Never being someone who projects all the answers, but being an honest seeker, like in Harry Potter.
I love
Quidditch.
I like that analogy, to be honest. I feel like it's an important analogy because often, as you say, the truth seekers are the people. It's like they want to say "I told you so," but they can never say it. And I like that concept. So leading into from like a common sense ethos and mindset, not somebody else. I asked, so you're gonna have to edit that. Essentially, with bearing everything that you said, in that case, with a common sense mindset and ethos, why should we have a platform for fruitful dialogue if people will disagree regardless?
Yeah, because I think in today's generation, a win is just hearing difference. You know, I don't think you have to force people to agree. So I don't think a good conversation ends with, "Oh, Marcel, we're right. I agree with you." I don't think that's how a good conversation ends. I think a good conversation could end with, "I totally understand you, and that's why I disagree." Because what happens in that exchange is, I at least understand you. And I think today, not enough of us actually understand each other. And you can tell when you look at the kind of texture of political discourse. People often resort to rhetoric, to insults, to, "Oh, he's a terrible person, a thick individual, she's dumb, she's stupid." All these statements, for me, are very telling, because it often means you don't understand what they're saying, because the only reason you insult somebody is because you have nothing intelligent to say to them. Because it's one thing to say that, it's one thing to say, you know, okay, I see where you're coming from. I appreciate you've thought about this and you've arrived somewhere different. I just think this will do more good, right? And that's good. You know, whichever one of us can convince the most people gets political power and gets to try the idea out. That's it. But we don't see that in discourse. We just see insults. So for me, it might be a very low bar, but I think it's still a worthy cause, is let's just get to a place where we can have a platform, like we're building, where you can hear different perspectives, where you can click on and go, "Oh, right, that's what they think. Okay. I disagree, but cool." And you'll notice, like, a lot of our writers, we forced to have, you know, in our newsrooms, we literally hear different ideas and then someone will come in with a right wing and left wing, and you're like, "Oh my God, this is interesting." For me, it's hard, it's difficult. It'll be much easier to get a group of journalists who agree with me, but I just don't think that's a social good. And that's why we're doing what we do, because I think if we get it right, and it's very hard to get right, mate, it's like doing a handstand on like one. It's hard. But I think even if we don't get it quite right, if we get close enough, we would at least have done social good by exposing people to different ideas.
So amidst the tide of polarization and division, with what you just said, what would you say is the impact of an idea such as an echo chamber?
Yeah.
And what is the impact on a demographic such as the Gen Z?
Yeah. Okay. Good. Lucky, you're asking the great questions, mate. That's really good. I would say echo chambers are dangerous, as we both know. I mean, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. This is like daily chat for us, right? But the echo chambers are dangerous, man, because everything bad starts there. When you're in a room where, you know, you attribute a lot of weight to some ideas, nothing's challenged, you're never having to give a defense for things, you're never having to reason, you just kind of believe what you want to believe. It makes you more susceptible to believing the worst things, which in turn can lead to some dangerous consequences. You acting on those worst things you believe. It just makes you more ideologically obtuse. It makes you, you know, more irritable, and it makes you a really bad citizen because you know, countries work because lots of different ideas can coexist. It wouldn't be a country if only one, you know, it would be some kind of totalitarian regime. So you want diversity. Your life is enriched by diversity. And every pull to stay in one echo chamber, we should resist so we can be, you know, in a space where we can hear lots of different ideas and perspectives.
Cool. Well, thanks for answering some questions today.
Thank you for being here.
And yeah, that's all.
Thanks, man. Hey, thank you for taking time to watch that video. Here at the Common Sense Network, we thrive on exposing you to different ideas. If you're someone who likes ideas, you like learning new things, hit the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you're first to hear when we have a new video out.